Hello and welcome to Kumi now. Thank you for joining us. Sorry. Thank you for joining us for this latest online gathering as we talk about gender-based violence. We are glad that you were able to join us this week. This Thursday, November 25, is International Day for the elimination of violence against women. Join us in speaking out against gender-based violence in all of its forms, both in Palestine and around the world, as we observe the day. So my name is Andraus and I work at Sabil. Before we go further, I'd like to remind you that our webinar is being broadcast live on Facebook and we will be posted to YouTube. If you want to make sure your photo does not accidentally appear online, please turn off your camera. We would also greatly appreciate it if you could quickly share one of the links that are being put in the chat so that others may join. As usual, if you have an idea or project you would like to share for up to 5 minutes in a future meeting, please email us at kumi@kuminow.com. Now, it's time for our weekly activism survey. We will now launch the poll. Please note that there are 3 questions, so scroll down for the third. So we will give everyone another minute to answer. Then we will give the right answer. Okay, I think everyone's answered. So thank you to everyone who was able to take action this last week. And thank you to everyone in advance for the action that they are going to take this coming week. The answer to question 2 is, where is it legal for a Palestinian woman to request a divorce? Is the third answer in all of the places mentioned, the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel. However, divorced women are often socially blamed for their broken relationships and considered a burden on their families, discouraging many women from requesting a divorce, even in the worst of circumstances. Now, and the answer to question number 3, 50% of Palestinian women and 63% of Palestinian men agree that a woman should do what? Is the final answer: tolerate violence to keep the family together. We hope that you will find this session interesting and informative. Omar is not with us today, so we will skip an update on the ground this week and now turn to our main issue of the week, gender-based violence, and our special guest, Arish Daibes. As she speaks, if you think of a question, please type it in the chat and I will try to ask as many of them as possible when we get to the Q&A. Ms. Daibes, please introduce yourself and go ahead with your presentation.
Well, hello everyone. Sorry, we had to let Andraus allow me to unmute myself. Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Arish Daibes, and I'm a Palestinian woman, mother of two, and I'm an activist. I wear several hats. I'm also an interpreter as well as a program manager for a women organization, NGO. But I like always to think of myself as an activist for human rights primarily. And I'm pleased and I thank you for this opportunity to talk, to discuss today the question of GBV. And I hope you'll find it interesting. I need to be allowed to share my screen because I have a short presentation that I'd like to share with you. And Raus, can I share my screen? All right. I titled my presentation GBV, the shadow pandemic. And if you allow me, I will be discussing it first from the definition point of view from the international human rights frameworks, and then taking it down from like the international level to the level of Palestine and what is happening in Palestine and how GBV affects women and girls in Palestine. So I will quickly go about the definition, and the definition that is now acceptable and internationally. It is violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. So this is the standard definition of GBV. And as you see, it is also inclusive of different aspects of violence against women. But it has taken decades of struggles by the women's rights movements to persuade the international community to view gender-based violence against women as a human rights concern. Women's rights are human rights, and this is a main message that we always have to think of and always insist on. And it is not just a private matter in which the state should not interfere. Very quickly, I don't want to bore you a lot with like the instruments, international instruments regarding GBV and fighting GBV rather. But in 1992, the CEDAW committee and in its general recommendation number 19 asserted that violence against women is a form of discrimination directed towards a woman because she is a woman, or that affects women disproportionately, and therefore it inhibits women's ability to enjoy rights and freedoms on a basis of equality with men. And so this is important. In 1993, there is another declaration on the elimination of violence against women that recognizes violence against women as violating women's rights and fundamental freedoms, and called on states and the international community to work toward the eradication of violence against women. The same year, there was the Vienna Declaration. And also in 1994, an important step was taken when they appointed a special rapporteur on violence against women, its causes and consequences. In 1995, the UN World Conference on Women held in Beijing reaffirmed the conclusions of the Vienna Conference, listing violence against women as one of the critical areas of concern. In 2017, and this is an important thing that happened, the CEDAW committee marked the 25th anniversary of its general recommendation number 19 that we just referred to by further elaborating the international standards on gender-based violence against women. In the recommendation number 35, CEDAW committee recognized that prohibition of gender-based violence against women has evolved into a principle of customary international law, therefore binding all states. And this is an important landmark. The general recommendation is a milestone in that sense because it recognizes that prohibition of gender-based violence has become a norm, as I just mentioned. It expands the understanding of violence to include violations of sexual and reproductive health rights. It stresses the need to change social norms and stereotypes that support violence in the context of narratives threatening the concept of gender equality in the name of culture, tradition, or religion. And these are very important when we also come to talk about the situation in Palestine, in the Middle East as well, but also in, worldwide. It clearly defines different levels of liability of the state for acts and omissions committed by its agents or those acting under its authority, for failing to act with due diligence to prevent violence at the hands of private individuals and companies, protect women and girls from it, and ensure access to remedies for survivors. It also calls for the repeal, and this is also again important when we get to talk about the situation in Palestine, of all laws and policies that directly and indirectly excuse, condone, and facilitate violence, and the need for approaches that promote and respect women's autonomy and decision making in all spheres of life. So this is a very important recommendation that has become widely accepted, and also the very important point, as mentioned, that this has become a norm to prohibit gender-based violence and a norm of international customary law. What types of violence against women? There are several, of course. We talk about domestic violence, and underneath it, there are economic, psychological, emotional, physical, and sexual violence. There's the femicide, which is the crime of intentional murder of women because they are women. And it is different from homicide. And this is what I wanted to clarify. That
Sorry, Arish, sorry to cut you. Could you just please put it in a slideshow so as people can read the
okay. Let me see if I know how to do that.
yes, exactly, yes.
This one?
This one, yes.
Yeah, but it says start from the beginning. Okay, all right. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. The domestic violence, it includes economic violence, psychological violence, emotional violence, physical and sexual violence. Femicide is another form of violence against women. It's the intentional murder or of women, sorry, because they are women. And it's different because most cases of femicide are committed by partners or ex-partners and involve ongoing abuse in the home, threats or intimidation, sexual violence, or situations where women have less power or fewer resources than their partners. And this is something that I will get back to when I talk about two incidents that just happened yesterday in the Palestinian territories. Honor killings is usually a murder by a family member for the reason or the excuse that the person has brought dishonor or shame upon the family. I'd rather call it dishonor or lack of honor to that manner. There's no honor in killing a woman. Sexual violence, there's sexual harassment, rape, corrective rape, which is based on the sexual orientation or gender identity. It is intended to force the victim to conform to normative gender identity. And then there's the rape culture, human trafficking, female genital mutilation, child marriage, online or digital violence. We said that there was like important progress made regarding women's rights, regarding protection of women against GBV, but let's have a reality check. The figures on the prevalence of gender-based violence against women are alarming. According to data by the World Health Organization, 1/3 of women globally experience violence at least once in their lifetime. There are still obstacles to women's access to justice, resulting in widespread impunity for violence. And this is something that we can talk about when we talk about what kind of actions we can also think of. Considerable efforts are still required to promote women's and girls' autonomy and choice, and to ensure the realization of the right of women and girls to a life free from violence. I wanted to give you some facts and figures because they were shocking even when I was preparing for this presentation for me personally. Globally, 736 million women, almost 1 in 3, have been subjected to intimate partner violence, non-partner sexual violence, or both at least once in their life. The figure doesn't include sexual harassment. And we're talking about 736 million women. This is according to UN Women data 2021. Most violence against women is perpetrated by current or former husbands or intimate partner Of those who have been in a relationship, almost 1 in 4 adolescent girls aged 15 to 19, that is 24%, have experienced physical and or sexual violence from an intimate partner or husband. Calls to helplines have increased fivefold in some countries as rates of reported intimate partner violence increased because of COVID-19 pandemic. And this is something that we can also talk about when we get to talk about Palestine. Uh, since the outbreak of COVID-19, violence against women and girls, particularly domestic violence, has intensified. Women are forced to stay with the perpetrator of violence against them, and they find themselves isolated from the people and resources that can help them. 87,000 women were intentionally killed in 2017. Majority of the killings were committed by intimate partner or family member of the victim. Violence against women and girls is pervasive, but at the same time widely underreported. Less than 40% of women who experience violence report these crimes or seek help of any sort. You can imagine that in a country like Palestine, where some of these issues are considered a taboo, the the percentage of underreporting can be expected to be much higher. The global cost of violence against women had previously been estimated at approximately $1.5 trillion. The figure can only be rising as violence increases now and continues in the aftermath of the pandemic. I will not go through all the figures. I can share the presentation with you if I shared it already with Kumi, and maybe if anybody is interested to look more closely at these figures, you can look at them. But some of the other types of violence include the genital mutilation. At least 200 million women and girls aged 15 to 49 had undergone that. 15 million adolescent girls worldwide experience forced sex. School-related GBV is a major obstacle to universal schooling and the right of education. In the Middle East and North Africa, 40 to 60% of women have experienced street-based sexual harassment. And across 5 regions around the world, 82% of women parliamentarians. And here it was also shocking because it is not against one category of women or certain women who are subjected to GBV. Women parliamentarians reported having experienced some form of psychological violence while serving their terms. If we get to facts and figures in Palestine, and if I'm going too quick, somebody should tell me that I should slow down because I'm like very excited, not excited, enthusiastic about sharing all the information with you. But in Palestine, gender-based violence is widespread in the Palestinian society according to available surveys. Particularly, women suffer multiple sources of discrimination and violence in private and public sphere. It is a structural violence, including discriminatory laws, traditional practices, violence from family members and intimate partners. Gender-based violence serves mainly to perpetuate male power and control, and it is sustained by a culture of silence and denial, as well as ignorance of the seriousness of the health consequences of abuse. As we said, there's a lot of underreporting, and it same applies. And I'm talking about Palestine domestically, meaning internally, and I still did not address the question of the other layer of GBV that Palestinian women suffer from as a result of being under occupation. Sexual violence, including sexual exploitation and abuse, is a taboo subject in the Palestinian society, making it difficult for victims to talk about it openly, report the crimes, and seek professional assistance. Women organizations are also reporting increase in Palestine in GBV incidents since the COVID-19 pandemic related lockdown measures since they were put in place. At the same time, restrictions on movements by Israeli occupation and services, so restriction on movements and services prevent women and girls from accessing essential services, including health, protection, security, and justice. Restriction on movement also risk normalizing prevalent patriarchal conceptions that women's place is at home. And this is a setback compared to what the kinds of achievements that were made in previous years in terms of more women trying to go to continue their education or engage or be part of the labor force. Moreover, women's unequal access to information and connectivity is likely to make them more vulnerable to the negative impacts of confinement, at least in Palestine under the COVID-19, during the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, as I said, the statistics are not very readily available in Palestine, unfortunately. But according to a 2016 UN Women report, psychosocial violence continues to be the most reported type of violence, 51% in Gaza. In the West Bank, 30% of women reporting cases of violence experience psychosocial violence, and another 30% reported physical violence. In 78.5% of cases, and this is something that we've seen similar to the international trend, the perpetrator was a spouse, parent, or sibling, where the parent or sibling maybe not as much internationally, with spouses alone making up 67% of all cases. In 84.3% of cases where a woman was killed, the perpetrator was a family member. There's an organization called SAWA that had a research in 2018 alone. There has been 22 so-called honor killings of women and girls. According to the Palestinian National Strategy to Combat Violence Against Women, many cases of violence against women and girls go unreported as they are solved internally to protect the family reputation. But again, in Palestine, there's a double layered violence, if you want, or a multi-layered violence. In Palestine, women suffer from the intersectionality of patriarchal and traditional norms with the Israeli occupation violence. Honor killings have increased often under the pretext of bringing shame to the family, but usually have implicit economic or other reasons. Only yesterday, there were 2 cases of femicide whereby a woman in her 50s and another woman in her 30s were killed at the hands of their husbands. Discriminatory laws, especially in terms of personal status and penal codes, are forms of violence against women affecting all aspects of their lives. GBV against women activists and human rights defenders is another form of violence experienced by Palestinian women, whether by Israeli and more recently Palestinian security forces. The right to education for girls and women is also hampered by Israeli occupation measures, but also by traditional practices of early marriages, despite the efforts of women organizations and the success actually in 2019 to get the president to raise the marriage age to 18. But there are still exceptions that are left to the discretion of the judges, the Sharia court judges, and sometimes the fear is that the exception becomes the norm. There is the law, but then there are exceptions. Women and girls with special needs are subject to additional forms of GBV. Sexual harassment and exploitation at the workplace, although not discussed openly, is also present, and there's an increase in cyberbullying, harassment and exploitation of women and girls. Palestinian women also suffer from violence in the form of killing of their loved ones by Israeli forces, arrest of Palestinian men, arrest of Palestinian women themselves, denying them the right to see their families. Recently, we had a woman, a parliamentarian, who was put in jail. There's the administrative detention practice by Israel, and whereby they don't reveal the reasons for the detention. People are held in prison without disclosing the reason why they were put in prison. This woman lost her daughter. Her daughter died of natural causes, but she was not allowed neither to bid her dying daughter farewell, or to see her or to take part in her funeral, despite the fact that she had only 2 months left to serve in prison. And this is only one form of violence that Palestinian women are experiencing. And sometimes women themselves, as I mentioned, are put in prison on political grounds or for human rights because they are defenders of human rights. Women suffer also from house demolitions, revoking of their residency rights in Jerusalem particularly, or rejection of family reunification requests, whereby, for example, a woman from West Bank who is married to a man from Jerusalem cannot live together in the same place, and as a result suffer also from lack of health insurance coverage and other services, as well as just being with the family alone, together in one place. I will stop at before what we can do. I have some suggestions, but I don't know if Kumi wants to first propose certain or make certain suggestions before I have some suggestions of my own, but I'll wait to hear from Kumi in that regard.
Okay, thank you so much, Arij. We would now like to introduce our action for the day and give everyone a few minutes to get started on it before we do the questions and answers. This time also allows our guests to have a short break and get a drink before answering your questions, and allows you to take a break as well. You can see on the slide, we would like to encourage the UN Women's Office to hold Israel accountable to Resolution 1325. So thank you so much. We'll now get to work. Instructions are on the screen. Please note that Zoom does not allow on-screen links. Everything you need is being shared in chat. We'll give you about 5 minutes to get started sharing resolution 1325 or simply starting to learn about it yourself. We will then come back to the Q&A.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I was also here earlier, but I was unable to unmute myself anyway.
No problem. So yeah, this is, like if you want to add something for like suggestions.
Let me see. Where was it? Sorry. Stop share. Hang on. Sorry. Sorry about that. Slideshow. Oh, sorry. Yeah. what can we do in general terms, and then on the Palestinian level? Awareness raising, education, and studies on impact of GBV on the development and prosperity of our world. Approaches that bring in the widest coalitions to fight against GBV, including strategies to work with men and boys, sensitize them, and have as many allies as possible. We can't see it a matter of women only being involved in this. Everybody needs to be involved in fighting GBV, considering GBV as a matter of human rights and not only an issue related to women. Pushing for laws for prevention, protection against GBV, and prosecution, rehabilitation of perpetrators, and eliminating impunity for GBV. In Palestine, Palestine ratified CEDAW without reservation, but fails until this date to harmonize domestic laws and repeal laws that contradict the provisions of the convention. And therefore, there are many women organizations on the ground that are working in advocacy campaigns for the implementation of CEDAW, the passing of the family protection law, and the amendment of personal status law and penal codes. You can get involved with women and human rights organizations on the ground to support their work and capacity development, to write shadow reports to Palestine's and Israel's state reports to treaty bodies. Because, for example, there is currently work on writing a shadow report to Israel when Israel submits its report for state review with the CEDAW committee regarding, for example, violations of women and girls' rights to education in Jerusalem through the checkpoints, through different measures that Israel is practicing and applying. You can write to representatives and state officials regarding violations, especially around important international days, such as the International Day for the Rights of the Palestinian People on the 29th of November, International Day of Human Rights, 10th of December, International Women's Day, and 8th of March. It is like these moments we should not forget about women's rights and the violations against women, Palestinian women and girls, and then highlighting Israel violations of Palestinian women's rights to that matter. The 16 days of activism that will be launched soon and will end on December 10 is another important occasion every year to be involved and to raise voices and to advocate for women's rights and against Israel's violation of these rights and GBV practiced against Palestinian women and young girls. So these were some of the suggestions that I had for you today. And I will stop sharing.
So now we will go to the answers. So we'll go to questions, sorry. The first question.
Questions that we hope we will have answers for.
Yes. To what extent is female genital mutilation a religious requirement? Or if it is just cultural, why are those cultures which approve FGM usually to be found in the Islamic world?
I don't think I am in the right person to answer that question. First of all, we don't have it in Palestine, which is good news. Secondly, I doubt that it is religiously required. I think it's more culturally. And in many cases, oftentimes there's this confusion between what is a cultural norm and traditional practices and what is a religion proper. I think I can look for information and try to get back to you on this, but I don't feel I have the sufficient knowledge to answer such a question.
Okay, question number 2. How is the Women's Studies Center making your services known and attractive to women?
Yes, interesting question. We have been working in Palestine since 1989. The organization has long-standing relations with different communities and different CBOs, and we are on the ground. And we have several branches in Palestine. We advertise our programs. We work on programs rather than project-based approaches. We announce, we advertise, we use social media, we use our website, we use radio and TV, traditional media, to get the messages across and to get the information across. So this is how we engage. We work a lot with youth. We have a program just to mobilize youth in support of women's rights and against GBV, and also to be part of our advocacy and lobbying campaigns. We are part of a coalition of Palestinian NGOs that work against GBV, and we have also our regional, and we are members of regional networks to that matter. And recently we joined an initiative. There's a global call to act that has been established, and there are attempts to establish one at the regional level, and Palestine and the Women's Studies Center are part of the thinking and this initiative at the current time. COVID-19 helped us, which I don't know if there's anything good to COVID-19, but the ability to talk to people over like social media and through social media has allowed us to get our messages even to a larger numbers of people, and we have many online advocacy campaigns that have been extremely successful in letting people know about these issues and recruiting more allies to the cause of women's rights and against the violations towards them.
Okay, third question.
Mhm.
What consequence is there for the husbands who kill their wives?
What consequence? Of course, according to penal codes. The problem is with what the so-called honor killings, and these are ones that where the perpetrator is given a reduced sentence. In the past at least, that it was because of anger, because of shame and dishonor to the family. Women organizations have lobbied and worked on changing that and on eliminating this provision that allows a reduced sentence for a man who kills his wife on the claim of honor, or even a father, or even a sibling to that matter. Otherwise, they are prosecuted according to the penal codes that are applicable. But oftentimes, I think what happens around the killing, and usually this is like if so many people and high percentages of people believe that using violence against women, a woman should tolerate it so that to keep the family together. Oftentimes, when a killing of a woman happens, people think, "Oh, she must have done something," or it's the blame on her always to that she has done something that did or led to her being killed. And so there's a lot to be worked around the culture and the mindsets of people as well, in that sense, not only the law.
Fourth question, is Sharia law the law in all parts of Palestine? Is there also non-religious law?
Um, Sharia law is in Palestinian territories everywhere. We have also church laws. We have ecclesiastical courts, church courts, and the church law in that sense. Um, um, Civil law, no, it's not applicable in Palestine in the sense of marriage issues, family matters, custody, alimony, child support. All of these issues are regulated by religious laws in Palestine.
Fifth question, how can we make respect for all people a part of the law? How do we change the big picture?
How do we change the big this is a big this is a big question. uh, the big picture and the big question. There is a lot to be done. I think it is gradual. I think there has been a lot of progress in that sense, but I think it's a combination of many things. It's education, it's awareness raising, it's education curricula, it's from the bottom up approaches. It is showing that the impact of not respecting everyone and the human rights of everyone, but it also has to come through the law. And I think working to change mindsets bottom up and then also from top down, these are approaches, and it has to be synergies among all of those together to make the change that we are hoping to have. And it is always evolving. There is always, as people get more knowledge, as people get become more aware, there's always more space to do things and change matters. But it's a lot of work of everyone, civil society organizations, individuals. Every person has a responsibility, from even if it's related to raising up good children, in the sense of children who understand that they need to respect the rights of everyone else. If that is done, that would even make a difference on a daily basis. But that's
Yeah.
my 50, what do they call it? 50 pence? Or how, what is the saying? Can somebody help me here? Sorry. But that's my contribution to the question. My 2 cents worth. Yes, thank you, Judith.
Another question, how does the designation as a terrorist organization by the Israeli Defense Ministry of the Union of Women's Committees impact the fight against GBV in Palestine? You need to unmute.
I had to unmute myself because I was coughing, but
So
then I was unable to unmute myself, to mute myself, and then I was unable to unmute myself. Could you please repeat the question?
yes. How does the designation as a terrorist organization by the Israeli Defense Ministry of the Union of Women's Committees impact the fight against GBV in Palestine?
Oh, definitely. This just goes to say, like this, as I mentioned already, this intersectionality between the different kinds of violence. The designation, it's we understand that it is political, and it is just to silence people because they are working for women and with the people and defending human rights. And this is a reality of life for Palestinians in every aspect. So of course, the services provided by the Union of Women Committees will be hampered. They will not be able to provide neither awareness nor services to women, and this would lead to women being denied and deprived of this kind of very much needed help in that sense. So this designation is we understand it to be very political and has no grounds but to silence anyone who wants to defend and work for human rights and women's rights.
Okay. Are any major religious groups, Muslim or Christian or others, trying to address this discrimination? Are the religious leaders in Palestine publicly supporting improved recognition of women's human rights?
I think there are, and I have to, if you allow me, to note the great model set by the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Holy Land and in Jordan. In 2015, they enacted a new personal status law that grants gender equality. They are talking about equality for women, also in supporting women to assume decision-making roles and positions, and in their engagement in all aspects of life, equality in terms of inheritance, in terms of divorce rights, alimony and child support, all of these issues. This is a great model, and I know of it because I've been interpreting for several workshops regarding this, and I think they set a great example, and I think they are working on expanding that and also engaging other churches, for example, to be discussing this and supporting clearly women's rights and more gender equality in that sense. Um, and there are, of course, Muslim clerics who support women's rights. There is also women judges in Sharia courts, and this is also a step forward because we need to get women also to be part of that process and also to work on pushing towards changing the laws, and hopefully this will shift eventually with time and gradually. But yes, yay, ELCGHL. I agree with Randall. Yes.
How can the law be changed if it is religious law? Is it much more difficult than changing the law of a government?
Almost definitely, and that has been the case for. That's the problem, in fact. But I think there is always ways to find new interpretations. I think it is just also being lazy in a way, because on behalf of the scholars, the religious scholars, and the people who are engaged in this, I'm sure if they look into it and if they can interpret it, they will have new jurisprudence and new things to add, and to also within the religious law to find space for more equality, and also the idea of probably also having the alternative of civil law. So at least to have that, so people who want to go to religious courts can, and others who want to have other forms of laws applying to them can have that too as an option.
Okay, I think that's it. There are no more other questions. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Arish, for
Thank you.
dedicating your
Thank you.
time and sharing with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Keep up the good work. I think it's great. It's always refreshing to know that there are people who want to take action towards supporting Palestinians and Palestinian rights and human rights in general. Thank you very much.
A link to a video of this gathering, along with all the links shared today, will be available on the Kumi Now website and on YouTube in a day or so. And it will be shared in the next newsletter. You can subscribe to Kumi Now on YouTube and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you receive them. Would greatly appreciate it if you shared this very insightful session with your friends and colleagues, as well information on our future sessions. Next week, we will focus on the Kairos document. If you like to be reminded of our online gatherings an hour before they begin, you can register for email reminders at kuminow.com/online using the form at the bottom of the page. We hope to see you back here in a week's time. Thanks again and good night.
Thank you. And please sign me up for that for next week's workshop. I would like to attend it.
And
Webinar.
we would love to have you with us.
Yeah, I'd love to be there. Thank you. It's a great document. I'm glad you're having a like a session around it. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.